The number is the rough miles to go till it's depleted. These 12 bars are really a much more accurate gauge of how much is left. So right now I've got 4 bars showing, so I've used up 8 bars out of the full charge. When you accelerate, the circles light up over here the more you accelerate, because that's using power. When you're slowing down and regenerating the brake, they light up to this direction, showing that you're braking and regenerating the battery.
Not only is the dashboard different from a gas car, an electric car works on a completely different power system. When you push the pedal, the pressure is sent to a potentiometer, which converts the pressure to digital information. That information is then sent to the controller, a small box that interfaces the battery and the motor. The controller draws power from the battery and sends it to the motor. The DC motor uses magnets that alternate their magnetic poles. With this, the car is able to start with minimum power input and accelerate quickly and smoothly.
You really have to learn how to use the gauges, how to read, and you have to learn how to drive a little bit differently than you otherwise would. And that was kind of one of the fun experiences, was the challenge of learning how to drive an electric vehicle. When you hit the pedal, it accelerates quickly, smoothly, and powerfully, and very, very quiet. It is a fun car to drive. It is so quiet and so smooth. Now when I go on a trip and rent a car, I find even a new rental car to be substandard. One person said to me, "Well, that's a nice car, but you can't really go more than 20 miles an hour, right?" And I said, "Well, no, actually I can go 90 miles an hour." Oh, didn't realize that. Or it's only good, you don't only go for an hour or two, you go 10 or 20 miles and then the battery goes dead. Well, no, actually you can go for a lot longer than that. There were a lot of misconceptions.
In 1900, 28% of all cars produced in the U.S. were electric. A decade later, however, advancements in internal combustion technology and mass production made gasoline cars the dominant automobile.
I wrote that my book to test is the history of the automobile, a case of lock-in, a case of path-dependent technological selection. But my own findings in that case were, it wasn't so much that a worse technology won or a better technology won. The technology that won, internal combustion, in 1900, won because it served the needs of a particularly empowered and important group of consumers better than the electric vehicle did.
In the 1970s, the U.S. witnessed a renewed interest in the electric car, spurred by the OPEC oil embargo and energy crisis. However, the enthusiasm soon died down when electric cars were not able to outperform gas models. Since the early 2000s, especially in the past few years, we are seeing another wave of hype around electric vehicles. Despite the renewed interest, both consumers and manufacturers still tread with caution.
You know, sometimes you'll hear this criticism, this idea that the electric vehicle isn't a zero emissions vehicle, it's an emissions shifting vehicle. That may be technically true, but emissions shifting is actually a very good thing, because we go from 200 million poorly regulated point sources of emission to several thousand very well regulated point sources of emission that we could then retrofit and control and monitor very effectively going forward.
There were more charging stations. I think people would be a little bit more comfortable with it, because again, you are limited by the range. And so if you're taking it on a trip and you go 80 or 90 miles and then you must stop for 4 or 5 hours to recharge, that's not a very good way of traveling. If you had places to stop along the way, what they're planning to put out in public are chargers that are even more powerful. And so the idea is that you could charge the car to about 80% of the battery capacity in about 15 or 20 minutes. In my job, it was interesting to see how an electric vehicle would work from a safety perspective. One is, again, I had to learn a new way of driving. The dashboard is very different. There are a number of different ways that you watch your range on the dashboard. That's a huge distraction issue. Number two was the fact, again, it is so quiet. And so I think Nissan, and I think it was a federal requirement, added a low external noise to the vehicle so that a pedestrian who didn't see the car would now hear something, because it is very, very quiet. So that's the second issue. There was a third issue I didn't really even think about till after I had the car and attending one of the sessions at one of our safety meetings. Law enforcement or medical or fire emergency response comes up on the scene of a crash. There's a vehicle now with what could be a very powerful still live battery in it. And so the emergency responders have to be careful of that. They have to know how to treat the vehicle and the people who might be trapped in the vehicle in a way that protects themselves and the people in the vehicle.
U.S. sales of electric vehicles in 2012 were 5 times greater than sales in 2011. Although new electric cars constitute less than 1% of the U.S. automobile market, there is certainly reason to believe that this time, the electric car just might catch on.
I think it's going to go slowly until it doesn't, and then it's going to go fast.